Tony Payne.
Mark,
Great to see you.
how you doing?
I'm doing great. Welcome to the MBIT podcast. We call it Ambitious. We are here, obviously not in my office.
Right.
On a blue, I don't know, what would you call this? Velour couch?
Yeah, velour.
And there's plenty of people looking at us as they walk by. We are at the National Policy Seminar.
Yes, Washington, D.C.
What are we doing here?
Pleading our case.
For what?
Why career in tech's so important. We really don't have to plead it much, though. We just have to keep reinforcing, right?
I'd agree with that. This is an interesting, it's put on by the
ACTE.
ACTE, right? So Association of Career Technical Ed. And so they're here to help us advocate for career and technical education at the federal level, which I know your school, definitely our school, receives Perkins funding. That's the major federal insertion into our schools. So we spend the first day working with policymakers and learning about what the priorities are for legislatively for the current Congress. And then we spend the next day meeting with our local elected officials, which is a pretty fun thing to do, but also really important to making sure that career and technical ed is at the forefront of their minds for funding packages.
Right.
You want to talk about your role and what you do and where you work?
Sure. I'm Executive Director, Huntington County, Career and Tech Center. Small to medium-sized rural CTC in central Pennsylvania. We have about 370 students, up from 260 a few years ago. So, not quite a 50% jump, but getting there.
But like every other career tech school in the state, and as we'll hear, I'm sure later in the country, seeing exponential growth.
Yes. Waiting lists for some of our programs, just like many schools. But my role there is the executive director, make sure things are going the way they should,
And so Huntington County,
we have 4 sending schools: Juniata Valley, Huntington area, Southern Huntington, and Mount Union. So.
Okay. And located where, for folks that don't know?
About halfway between State College and Altoona. So State College is where Penn State's located. So we're a half hour from State College.
Do you identify as Central PA or Western PA?
Central. In fact, I think if you actually, rumor had it that the corner of Old Main at Penn State is the geographical center of the state. North, south, east, and west.
Gotcha.
So it's about as central as you can get.
And you and I have both done the National Policy Seminar before.
Yes.
And obviously found it rewarding enough to want to return and valuable. I say to friends, where we are with our roles, it's very well looked upon by a lot of the lawmakers. We're part of the infrastructure of the nation. We're part of, obviously, part of the education system. And so
it's very bipartisan, both sides of the aisle.
Very much so. And so when we come to these sorts of programs, it's amazing the access that we get. I mean, I know that we're working with our local organization to set up meetings with our senators' offices. I know last year that was not an issue at all. We met with the senators' offices, met with our local congressmen. And then there's also gatherings where there's different CTE caucuses that meet, and they host us for conversations. It's pretty neat to be up on Capitol Hill and be as well received as we are for these conversations.
Right, for sure.
How does your school typically spend their Perkins funds?
Equipment for the programs. We do, but we budget a little bit in there for some professional development for the teachers. I would argue we're probably one of the few schools in the state. Now, this is partly due to our size too, but we send our entire staff to the Integrated Learning Conference. It's on our calendar. We shut the school down for 2 days. Sending schools are good with it, and every teacher, para, staff person goes to the Integrated Learning Conference, which is, the teachers sort of, they find that very valuable. I mean, we go to enough of these that we get to see how it works. But when they get that experience and they go to some of those breakout sessions and whatnot, they really bring a lot back. But some of the Perkins money goes there. But for the most part, being the size we are, we don't get a windfall of Perkins money. Maybe, I don't know, 100,000-ish, a little bit less. But we can do a lot of good with that as far as by keeping equipment updated. We have 12 programs next year. We're adding a program next year. So that's the majority of our money goes for that.
I know that it's also almost a universal truth that, there's a lot of expense in career and technical education. Our pencils and pens and paper are 2x4s
right.
and car lifts, right? And painting booths. And so we rely on some of these funds that give us access to these larger sums of money because
rely is a calm word to use. Yes, it's essential, really, because a lot of schools couldn't function without some of this funding. And so,
advocating at the federal and state level is sort of part and parcel to what we do. We were talking just a second ago about that professional development. I think people don't always realize, because we are a public school, they just make, I think, some assumptions about how we recruit folks, how we get our teaching staffs.
Right.
And so just to break down that conversation about the Integrated Learning Conference a little bit, a lot of times, I would say for 90+% of my staff, these are folks out of industry who don't have any pedagogical background.
Right.
And so I think an otherwise, regular K-12 institution might look at that and say, wow, you're closing down the whole school just to go to a conference. But when you realize that, that's a great way to get bang for your buck, to get those folks a large amount of professional development, because pedagogically, they're going to see all kinds of different approaches from different offerings, different schools. They're going to be able to network. Here's the other piece too, is you had how many programs you just said?
12, 13 next year.
So in those 12 programs, the next closest career tech center to you is how many minutes away? Probably a good bit.
Probably 40 minutes, I would say.
So in terms of those teachers being able to network with just a peer in their content area, it could be an hour, it could be more away, but they can go to a conference like that, and you can use this money that otherwise wouldn't be in your general budget dollars.
Right. What your point's well taken. Like, you're assuming the one that's 40 minutes away has all the programs we offer. That may not be the case, right? So, our public health and safety, I don't think our Mifflin County may not offer that, so we may have to go an hour and a half to find someplace that offers it. So, the networking aspect is huge. And, CTC itself is typically, and I think we've both been in the public school sector, I feel CTE is, we share a lot of resources, right? Like, more so than I think the sheer number of CTCs in the state helps, right? 69, 70, 71, whatever there is, versus 500 school districts. It's just not feasible for all the school districts to sort of get together and share stuff. Whereas, I don't want to speak for you, but between the both of us, we probably know 90% of the directors in the state on a first name basis. And one call away, we're there.
We're hours apart and communicate frequently and fluidly about anything that comes up. And some of our issues are going to be unique to our own separate locations, but some of our issues are going to be unique to career and tech ed. And so it is nice. We have career tech ed, generally speaking, is a tight network of folks, and it is nice to be able to rely on that network if needed. You were talking about your pathway to CTE. I think that would be a really interesting thing for folks to hear about, because your path, I think what's interesting for a lot of folks is that our paths are never generally very direct. And yours certainly was not direct getting into career and technical education.
Correct.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So my bachelor's degree, I have a bachelor's degree in architectural engineering from Penn State. So when I graduated from Penn State, that's a 5-year major, by the way, so it's 168 credits just to get a bachelor's. I sort of got into the industry, and I actually since we're down here in D.C., my first job was down here in D.C. for 3 years. Almost 3 years I worked down here. Then I started working for some design companies out of Evansburg and whatnot. And, yeah, I was doing the engineering thing and became a school board member. My local school I graduated from, Juniata Valley, which is one of my sending schools.
Okay.
And at that point in time, I had made a change sort of in my career, and I had started my own business, construction company, and was doing that for about 2 years. And in our area, like the feast and famine aspect of that was really what just sort of got to be so monotonous. You know, 1 month you're in the money, the next month you're knocking on 4 doors because customers aren't paying and this and that. So as a school board member, you know, I was privy to, well, not just that. There's a couple schools in our area, Huntington and Juniata Valley, were looking for tech ed teachers, which entailed wood shop, drafting, CAD, that kind of stuff. I'm like, you know what? I might give this a shot. So I applied, actually got hired in Huntington, went there for half a day. Juniata Valley, we had a person that was transferring in from across the state, decided to not come. I left Huntington one day, the day before school started, 2 days before school. My president of the school board called me and said, hey, are you still interested in a Juniata Valley job? Now, at that point in time, Juniata Valley is the smallest school out of those 4 county schools, but they also paid the best. They felt that pay for their teachers is an important thing to try to retain good teachers and kind of make sure they get the good ones out of the local area. So I started my teaching career at Juniata Valley, 2003, 2004. And I taught wood shop, drafting, CAD, enjoyed it. But I knew, like, I've always sort of been in the management aspect. And I knew, I come from a family, my mother retired as a principal, my dad retired as a cabinet member from one of the IUs. So, like, education's sort of been there, you know. So I started taking my master's, got my master's in education from St. Francis in 2011, and then started, at that point in time, I thought it's changed, but, you know, you could get your principals, if you were a principal, you could just apply and get your director's cert. And I thought that was the better way to go because at that point in time, you couldn't go the other way, right? If you were a director, you couldn't become a principal.
Right.
So, yeah, did that. Ended up getting my superintendent's letter in 2014 and my director's cert, and got hired at Fulton County as a director down there. And I haven't looked back since. In 2020, actually, year of COVID, I finished my doctorate at Cal U, which is now Penn West, I believe is the name of the school. So yeah, I jokingly say I got out of engineering and into education for the money, but it's a perfect, my background in actually teaching subjects at a public school and my engineering background just was a perfect marriage for career in tech, in my opinion.
So I come through the classic K-12 route. I was, my college degrees were in English and secondary education, and followed that path and figured I would be 10 years in the classroom, 10 years at a building, 10 years in central office. That would be my career. And after 5 years in the classroom, I interviewed for and got a position in administration. And then my path, evolved from there. And once I found career in technical ed, as a leader, I can't imagine going back to traditional K-12 ed. And so I guess I'm curious, I talk about this a lot, and I'm interested in your perspective about how, I'm really passionate about trying to change the perceptions of career and technical education. Because I think for a long time it was considered lesser than. And I think now what's fascinating to me is I think for a myriad of different reasons, whether it's the student loan crisis, whether it's the skills gap, whether it is COVID, I don't know what maybe it's all of those together.
For sure.
But it seems like that mentality is changing rapidly, and people are realizing that career and technical education is a really valid pathway. And in fact, I think the statistics that I've been reading say it's a faster path to 6 figures of earning, perhaps lifetime with college degrees or professional certificates. The overall lifetime earning could be greater, but in terms of speed to get to 6 figures, career technical education is the fastest route. The more I think about it, I think about college degrees as an industry certificate. I needed a college degree to do what I wanted to do.
Right.
And I think career and technical education allows you to consider which path has most interest to you, and you can pursue college if you want. I've been calling it an and option, not an or option to folks. But I'm curious as to if you're seeing in your area or if you feel the same way about the perceptions of CTE changing, and then we can dive into that a little bit too.
It is, and it's all the reasons you listed. Plus, I think just educating the counselors from sending schools and educating the parents is a big part of it, right? They don't know what they don't know. They think they know what they know, and they really don't, right? And you just have to constantly get them in your building, show them what you're doing, show them success stories. Here's graduates, they now work here, here, and here. And this guy did it right out of college, right out of high school. This student here did 2 years at a technical school to further. This one here decided, well, these are good skills to have, but I still think I want to go to college. It's and talking about the stigma and this and that, and it is getting better, but there's still not probably a week that goes by that I don't correct someone from calling it the VOTech to the career tech. It's just a mission I have, and I've done it to people that some of our JOC members. I think one of our local councilman or whatever did it, and I'm not afraid, and I correct them all the time. I'm like, oh, you mean career and tech? It's like,
well, and I have 21 programs at my school, and what I like to say to them is, the VOTech mindset was that these are 21 programs for 21 jobs. When you leave here, there's 21 options for you. Whereas I think the career tech mindset is these are technical skills with employability embedded, that those 21 jobs become, instead of 21 jobs, it's 21,000 jobs, right? You've developed technical skill. You now have practical application. You can take those technical skills. If you're in automotive, that does not mean you go immediately into an oil change shop when you graduate.
Right.
There's so many different options, and so many areas of the auto field are hiring. We were just at an auto competition, and the amount of folks as sponsors who are trying to make sure that students see their name and know that they're an option for them, they run the gamut, right? It's not just turning wrenches, which is the old mindset, right?
Yep.
So where I was going before is, with our background in traditional K-12 education, I reflect a lot on the fact that there were some things that we were trying to do in classic K-12 ed that I think CTE leads the way on, but because of that perception of lesser than, I don't know that traditional K-12 ed has always been open to it. I'll give you a couple of examples. When I was in classic K-12 ed, we were moving our schedule from a very short, 38 to 42 minute period day to longer blocks of time to do deeper learning, right? Mm-hmm. And so we in-serviced for 2 years. We developed a schedule that we in-serviced for 2 years on how to establish that classroom. And so I look at that, and that is good practice to do things that way. But then I look at career tech ed, and the buses drop off. They arrive at different times from the different districts. You've got students coming and going. You've got a teacher who has no pedagogical training when they come in the door, and the students are with them for 2.5 or 3 hours.
Teaching 3 different levels potentially, probably.
Teaching 3 different levels, right?
I mean, that's like asking a regular ed teacher, a math teacher, by the way, in this class, you're going to be teaching algebra, trig, and basic math to the same, that's all happening here. That would send them into a tailspin.
and so I look at that and I go, that's something that it's just part of our culture and part of what we do, right? And classic K-12 education doesn't adapt that way. I don't mean I say this with peace and love. I think my most flexible teacher I ever knew in a classic K-12 setting would be my least flexible teacher in a CTE setting because of that very reason, right? Like I said, some districts report today, others have testing today. There's a pep rally. You know, we are, as a member school or as a consortium school, sort of subject to what our district's schedules look like, and we adapt and we grow. So that's one example. The block scheduling. Another is, and you had mentioned it, is differentiated instruction. You know, there's 3 levels in front of you. Again, students coming, going at different times. Students at different places on the task list, right? They haven't shown that repeatable accuracy to cross off a task, so that student now needs remediation. You've got students who are maybe excelling on their task list and are your shop foreman or foreperson. And so now we're differentiating in that classroom. And again, we start with no classic pedagogical training. All of our teachers get pedagogically trained, but a lot of it is job embedded, which I think is really, really an interesting look at education that classic K-12 education doesn't do. And so, you know, I would say, I don't know if your school's the same, but typically speaking, most career tech centers overrepresent their sending district special education populations as well. So we overrepresent, I think, by double digits. So if their average is, just for the sake of conversation, 15%, we would represent at 25.
Right.
And do you see the same thing?
It's very same thing. In fact, yeah, I actually looked at that, and our 4 sending schools are anywhere from 18 to 24 to 25%, and we're at like 36, 37%.
And I actually think there's another conversation to be had, and actually there's some research that's going to be presented here in a couple of days that I'm interested to see if they touch on this at all. But I think that there's more to dig into why that overrepresentation happens, because I also think we get really great outcomes as well. I think to the same extent that we overrepresent, we also overachieve, which is a neat concept too that I think deserves more attention. And so just back to the classic K-12 piece, you know, those were sort of mountains that authentic learning is another one, right? So we would, in my English classroom, I'd strive to try to put together lessons that were authentic to students. But they were always still contrived by the educator to try to be authentic to the students. Whereas in the classic CTE setting, you've got a content area expert who has experience in the field. I mean, I taught English, and now you're in a different boat because you were the engineer who did the thing. I just had a lot of education on the thing. Right? So I was never an author. I was never, an editor. I just was trained in pedagogy and trained in English, and then delivered it as a content area expert. Whereas the difference in CTE is these are content area experts who have come from the field. So I guess I'm just interested in if you see that from your K-12 experience as compared to CTE.
Yeah. You're talking about making it authentic. Every single program does that, right, in CTE. Like, that's what they do. The kids can make that connection. They can see real-world examples. They can see all this, how this affects. Traditional K-12, there's some subject areas that is good. And the only reason I say that is because, and I didn't touch on it, but in 2011, while I was in the midst of teaching, they shut down my program, woodshop program. So I still taught CAD and drafting, but then I also taught physics. Physics is an easy one, right? Because I can say to the kids, the reason this car rolls down this hill, like there's so many real world examples to tie physics into, right? And the kids, it's sometimes they're like, oh yeah. But like math, sure, they know, hey, you're going to need some of this math, but like some of the more abstract math and this and that, English, like, a lot of the subjects are that way, right? They can't make that. How am I going to use this? I mean, that's a classic thing from a K-12 student a lot of times. When am I ever going to use this in my life again?
Right.
You ask anyone in any one of the programs, for the most part, we get the kids that are, maybe not there for the right reasons, but 90% are like, you don't even need to ask them how they're going to use that the rest of their life. You know what I mean? Like that, they're going to turn to you and look, well, that's how you build a block wall, and that's how things are made.
Right.
And I'm going to build a block wall when I leave here.
Two things stick out of my mind to that. I think we do a great job of making the learning realistic and authentic. You'll never find a better project-based learning situation or problem-based learning than you will in CTE, right? Like, I drove down here with a check engine light on. I'm not joking. And so, two things I'll say about that. Number one, I wish I had more technical knowledge myself, because I know when I see that check engine light that's dollar signs, right? So that's the first piece. But the second piece is, I don't know what the problem is. And so that love of learning is, neither does the technician or the student who's going to take a look at it, right? And so they have to figure out what the problem is, and then all they've done at that point is identify the problem.
Right.
They still haven't resolved it. And so I just think in career and technical education, that hill I tried to climb as an English teacher to make truly differentiated instruction or truly authentic learning, it's just what we do, and it's how we do it at Career Tech Ed. And I think that's really, really neat. And I think that K-12 Ed, as it's evolving, because I get the sense that K-12 Ed is at a point now where it is trying to evolve rapidly.
Yes. They're sort of in the same phase that community colleges are in right now. Like, in my 4 sending schools, if you look at their overall enrollment over the last 5 years, it's sort of staying the same, maybe trending down a little bit, right? Whereas our enrollment's going up. Community colleges and colleges in general, like it's real, they're struggling because of people are starting to figure out that not everyone needs to go to college, and some of them are going into a full-blown panic. How do we combat this? Do we need to add actually, post-secondary programs? And they are. They're adding them.
And they're adding technical programs.
Yes.
Very much.
So,
And so the other piece too.
Either adapt or die.
Right. Right. So and then I'll also say that the literacy in a career tech center, I'm amazed at the textbook that my dental students use. I'm amazed at the health occupations textbook that my students use. I'm amazed at the technical bulletins that my auto students are reading. I'm amazed at how much literacy is embedded in what we do. And again, and you'll never see students be more authentically engaged in literacy than when they're trying to figure out a technical bulletin on something that they're trying to figure out. My car's check engine light, right? Like, there's probably quite a few bulletins they're going to need to read just to have the skills that they need in order to make those necessary changes. So I think that's really neat. I also had perhaps the most cliche experience happen the other day in my school. I was giving a tour, and we walked past the electrical lab, and so the students have, you know what I'm going to say, and the students have, maybe you've had this experience, but for me it was like, we talk about this moment in education, but the party is happening outside.
I know, right?
Good thing they don't know we're in yet. We'll be right with you. So I'm giving a tour, and there's a couple of things that I tell people, especially when we're peering in from the outside of a classroom. I'll tell people, I just want you to look at the engagement, because the kids are just dialed into what they're doing.
Right.
But then I also want you to see the independence, right? So we talked earlier just about the stigmas and about the perception that maybe this is a lesser than option. But then you look at how much trust we give the students and the tools that we put in their hands and how safety has to be paramount in what they're doing. I mean, we have knives in culinary, we have circular saws in
Every shop has a
carpentry.
tool that if a student took to a K-12 setting, they would be suspended or potentially expelled from the school.
But used safely in our spaces,
Correct.
it is necessary
Yes.
for what they're doing.
Yes.
And so we're peering into this electrical lab, and the first thing I asked the person to notice was, where's the teacher? And it took us a moment because there's different areas that the students are working in. There's some students in the classroom. There were students working together in a group. There were students working in some of their mock-ups. And the teacher was working one-on-one with this, I think it was a young gentleman. And they're working together, and it was clearly an individualized lesson, right? There was maybe some reteaching going on. And then it happened, and the student flips the switch, and right above his head, the actual light bulb goes off.
All right.
And it was one of those epiphanies that sometimes you just need to be hit in the head with, right? Like, it was neat to see that actual light bulb moment happen right before my eyes, but right before the students' eyes too. And so I think it's really neat when the learning becomes alive for these students. And that sense of accomplishment's incredible. So I don't know if you want to share anything about your school in that respect.
Our welding program is a phenomenal program. In fact, if I would move one of my other programs out of the building, I could probably have 2 teachers and 50 students, 60 students.
I'm in the middle of expanding my welding program right now.
And we just built a new building. So this new building that we built, well, we put it into service probably 3 years ago, but it was intended, we were moving our body shop and our automotive out there, our mechanics. And our body shop was kind of liked where he was, and enrollment is okay, but not what our welding shop had. And I just thought it would be better use of the space. But, I had a very old school welding instructor, and he's retiring this year. He came to us 10 years ago. It was like we knew 10 years was his deal. Got his Voc 1, no desire to get his Voc 2. Like, they don't let you do that now. They sort of make sure you do it. But he's forgotten more about welding than I will ever know. And so he was very old school. IEPs, what are these? This and that. And there about 2 years ago, he had a student graduate that was an IEP student that ended up going to, he did, and I've never even heard of this. It was like nuclear welding. He was employed right out of, there's one of those situations where this company preferred to train their own people, right? Instead of sending them to a 2-year for additional. They do their own training. They pulled him out. He started at like $95,000, worked for 6 months, bumped up over $100,000, and they're like, oh, by the way, you are now going to be going to our training facility for the next 6 months. But while you're there learning, you're still getting your hourly wage. Mm-hmm. Like, they paid him to go to school. And he was just so, but like I said, literally the first thing that he said, when he was telling me about it, he goes, you know what? And that was the kid with that IEP. I'm like, yeah, that's the moment that every teacher's looking for, that success story and this and that. And there's numerous ones, but yeah, it's,
It goes to what we were saying before that, we see students outperforming all the time.
Well, they're looking for their lane, man, right? And that's partly also kind of how the stigma started 50 years ago, right? Like, they thought, okay, these are the only ones that can do this or go in this lane, or this is all they can do. But like, every student wants to be successful at something. They act like they don't sometimes, but I feel like they do. And when they find that niche and they find what they're good at, it's just amazing how discipline referrals, like it's just, I don't want to say they become a model student, but we'll tell the homeschool, yeah, so-and-so's, he's excelling here. And they're like, what? Joey, little Joey, crazy
Right.
Joey? Yeah, he's found his lane and he's going to be successful.
Right. I mean, that student maybe at the homeschool, you wouldn't want to let out of your class without a monitor. And at our schools, you put a circular saw in that student's hand and
Yep.
and they're dialed in.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So I think the fact that there's choice and voice in their education matters a lot. I think that they're choosing their paths with us, and now they are building confidence in their learning. If that's not the type of education with which you connect, then of course you're going to struggle. And with the type of learning that we offer, students have that opportunity to connect deeply, and I think that opens all kinds of doors. I mean, I love the idea that students, their job in high school is just to keep doors open for themselves, and I think Career Tech Ed's a good option for them to do that. So, well, Tony, this has been fun. Appreciate your time.
Yeah.
We'll have to see if we can find a different color couch next time we get together. But I appreciate it. It was fun.
Thank you.
All right, have a good one. Ambitious is a student-produced project of Middle Bucks Institute of Technology. To find out more about MBIT, visit us at www.mbit.org.